All right, I'm going to talk to you about how to use the distance formula to find the distance between 2 points, and then also how to find or how to use the midpoint formula to find the midpoint between 2 points, okay? So the first thing is the distance formula. And you can see here I've written the distance formula out. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail about where the distance formula comes from, but I'm going to talk about it real quickly. If I gave you these 2 points right here, you could see very quickly that the distance between these points is 2. Or if I gave you these 2 points right here, you could see pretty quickly that the distance between these 2 points is 4. Well, the coordinates of this first point is 1, 5. And the coordinates of this point is 3, 5. Well, you notice that there's a difference of 2 on the x value, and there's not a change of the y. So that's a quick way of just looking at the coordinates 2 and saying, oh, well, the distance between those 2 points is 2. Here, the coordinate of this point is -5, 1, and then the coordinate of this point is -5, 4. So you can see there's not any change on the x values, but on the y values, you can see that there is a, oops, I meant to write a 5 here. I'm sorry, that there's a difference of 4 here. So when you have horizontal or vertical lines, it's really easy to tell what the distance is between those two formulas, or between those 2 points. However, when you have a point where you can't just look at it and tell, so for example, if you have the distance between this point and this point, I cannot just look and see, oh, that's 1, 2, 3, 4. I can't just count. And when I look at the coordinates, the coordinate of this point is -4, 3, and the coordinate of this point is 2, 5. I can't just look and say, oh, well, that's a difference of 6 and that's a difference of 2. That doesn't tell me the distance, okay? Now, where this formula comes from is using the Pythagorean theorem, okay? So we can tell the distance here of between here, like it's a side of a triangle. We can tell that this has a distance of 6, and we can tell here that this has a difference of 2. And again, you can look at your x values to see the vertical change. I'm sorry, you can look at the y values to see your vertical change, and you can look at the x values to see your horizontal change. So that's pretty easy. But what you're doing here is you can use the Pythagorean theorem to find the length of this side. So really, that's where this comes from. This is saying that c squared is equal to a squared plus b squared. So c is equal to the square root of a squared plus b squared. Well, the way you find a is you find the difference of your x's, and the way you find b is the difference of your y's. So that's just a really quick explanation as to where the distance formula comes from, okay? So we're going to use this formula, and we are going to use the points -3, 2. So we'll say -3, 2. We'll call that point A. And then we're going to say point B is at 5, -4. And so again, it's very hard to tell just looking at it what the distance between these 2 points are. But I can plug my values here into this formula, and it's going to help me calculate that. Okay, so first of all, I want to say it doesn't really matter which one's x1 or y1, but you have to be consistent. So if this is x1, this has to be y1. If this is x2, this has to be y2. Typically, you just kind of go in order that you see it. Again, it doesn't really matter. But we're just going to go through, and we're just going to plug everything in, okay? So c is equal to the square root of x2, which is 5, minus x1, which is -3, and that difference we are going to square. And then we have y2, which is -4, minus y1, which is 2, and that difference is going to be squared. So I'm going to go through the process of simplifying this. So I have square root of 5 minus -3 is 5 plus 3, which is 8, and 8 squared is 64. -4 minus 2 is -6. -6 squared is 36. So c is equal to the square root of 64 plus 36, which is, I'm just rewriting that, 64 plus 36, which is 100. So therefore, c is equal to 10. So I can tell you that c, which is just the distance, is 10 units. Okay, now again, you can't just sit here and count, because remember, just because this is 1 and this is 1, this is not equal to 1. Okay, so I can't just sit here and count boxes like that. It doesn't work that way. So I have to use the distance formula to help me calculate that. Okay, now what I'm going to show you how to do is to find the midpoint formula. So I'm going to use those same points. I'm going to say we have A, which is at -3, 2, and we have B, which is at 5, -4. So -3, 2, and 5, -4. Well, the midpoint is the halfway mark. And so I can kind of eyeball it and I can kind of see about what the halfway mark is, but I don't know exactly. And again, we know that this distance is 10, so we know that it's 5 units, but we can't tell exactly where those 5 units stop. So this is where we're going to use a midpoint formula, okay? And the midpoint formula, if you kind of think of like averages, it's kind of what you're doing. You're saying here, and you're going to divide that by 2 to get your x value, and then you've got your y values that you're going to add together, divide by 2 to find the y value. And again, the midpoint is an actual point, so it's written like a coordinate point that will tell you exactly what the middle point is. And that the midpoint is where you would have possibly a line that would bisect. Think of bisecting, cutting something into 2 parts. So the midpoint bisects a line, okay? So let's use, so I'm going to do this again. So we said A was at -3, 2, and B is at 5, -4. And you don't really have to graph these. I'm just graphing them so that you can have a visual to help you. Too bad that's not a straight line. All right, so now we're going to plug it into this formula. And again, it doesn't really matter which one's your x1 or your y1 as long as you're consistent. So we'll say this is x1 and y1, and then we'll say that this is x2 and y2. So I'm going to plug them in my formula. My x1 is -3. My x2 is 5, and I'm going to divide that by 2. And then my y1 is 2. My y2 is -4, and we're going to divide that by 2. -3 plus 5 is 2 over 2. 2 plus -4 is -2 over 2. And then I'm going to simplify this. So 2 over 2 is 1. -2 over 2 is -1. So at the point 1, -1 is the midpoint. So right here at 1, -1 is the midpoint, and this is where it bisects the line and it makes 2 parts. And if you come back and look, I think I had it pretty close. Yeah, you had it pretty close to 1, -1. And so you can see how that works.